Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm so thrilled to be joined by the wonderful Ali Ahn to talk all about her current shows, The Diplomat and Agatha All Along. And starting out and talking about The Diplomat, I love the amount of detail that you always throw into the preparation of your characters in terms of creating these really rich backstories, and asking yourself dozens and dozens of questions so that you can really just live in the fabric of them and kind of let the preparation go once you're on set. And in particular for playing Idra, I feel like there's so much under the surface with her that I was really curious about some of the details of her backstory that you found it really helpful to flesh out, that we're not necessarily getting in the scripts on screen, but that really help you to play the subtext of her.
Oh, interesting. Deb is our showrunner. She's so smart, and so much of it is given in the writing. But the things that I did before the first season was to think about what was someone in the real world, what would their career trajectory have been in order to become a London chief of station at that age? Because I always start from, well, if I'm playing it, I have to ground it in the reality of like how would that actually happen? And so I had emailed a friend of mine who works in the State Department, because I just know nothing about that world really, and I just said, I've gotten this job, and it's this is the position I'm playing. Like, what would someone have had to have done to get that job? And when he told me that, he was like, "You're way too young for this job," and I was like, "Okay," even though Deb was like, "You're not," and I was like, cool. But he was like, "You're way too young. It's a very senior position." He's like, "It's a very cushy job. It's somebody that he's like, you would have to be a rock star and sort of like primed for maybe even eyeing like taking over the CIA." But he also said that I would have had to have been deployed in very like kind of conflict heavy zones, like hot zones that required a lot of oversight. And so it made me think about how to sort of hold power in a way that and when I talked to the other women who worked station chiefs, and just what it was to be a woman in the CIA, a woman in the field, and what that meant. And they sort of said, because I was really worried, like, I'm a tiny Asian woman. Like, is anyone going to buy me as having this kind of authority? And one of the things I was told, which I thought was really helpful, was that in the CIA, it's like your resume speaks for itself. So where you've been deployed, these things already. So you don't have to do a lot of like proving that you deserve the position in that way, because my friend who works in the State Department says that by the time I get to become London chief of station, everybody knows who I am when you walk into a room. So you don't actually have to be, because I in my head assumed that I would have to be proving to all the boys in the room that I knew what I was doing. And that helped me just be like, no. And I think it helped me create a character that is so confident that she can really actually be okay being reserved and held back. And the other thing that I thought about a lot was that the women that I spoke to talked about how ultimately being a chief of station, and you have to be a people person, and both in terms of the diplomacy of the CIA, but also to have success in the field, you actually have to be really good with people. So that was something I thought about a lot, in terms of, even if she doesn't show a lot of emotions, that fundamentally she is someone who understands people and is probably good with people and good at making people feel safe and comfortable. So that's probably something maybe that doesn't make it onto the screen, but just thinking about having how you hold power when you don't feel like you have to prove it is very different than how I engage in the world. So I thought a lot about stillness and silence.
I think it's so interesting as well with what you were talking about in terms of everybody knows who she is and she doesn't have to prove herself, because there will have been a point in the field where she probably was underestimated by people that she was encountering who didn't know who she was when she was undercover. And I've heard you mention in regards to that there's this aspect from a lot of your research of using the things that people perceive in you. And so how did you feel like along the way she's also really learned to understand how other people are perceiving her, and whether it's underestimating or something completely different, and to really utilize that as a tool for herself?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to a couple women about this who worked in the CIA, and talked to a woman who is also Asian American and was stationed. She was a chief of station in Asia, and she sort of said to me that nobody ever assumed that she was a spy. And so actually she could be quite out in the open because people just assume she's someone's wife or someone's sister. Like nobody is, and I thought about that a lot. And I think that the truth is I think it's like people who are really smart don't have to constantly tell everyone that they're smart. It's the people that are insecure about being smart. And so that was something I definitely think about. And I think in terms of people underestimating her, I think for Idra, that's only good because it means she can operate incognito. Um, and I think that people underestimating her also means that they might give her information that they don't think is particular, like she's not going to do anything with it, or yeah, she can be, I think, being a little like back-footed in that way, and people assuming, especially as a small Asian woman, that you're not a threat, or yeah, I think underestimation only works in her benefit.
The emotional space of the character is also really interesting. And I remember you talking about how it was quite challenging at the beginning to really figure out how do I make sure I'm showing enough, because she's a character who is very adept at staying calm. You know, they're dealing with these life and death stakes, but that's every day. So she
Yeah.
doesn't need to respond in that regard. And she also really understands what it means to show emotion in the workplace, particularly as a woman and how she's being perceived. And so you keep a lot underneath the surface, but we still connect to it and kind of understand what's going on through your performance. So, how did you set about answering the question of how do I make sure that I'm showing enough but not too much for the character?
I mean, I'm still figuring it out. Like I still feel like I have days when like, I don't know, was it too flat? Was it, and some of that I really have to credit Alex Graves, who is one of our executive producers, and he directed 4 out of 6 of the episodes of season 2. I look to the directors to basically be my eyes, and he's just been such a great he's always telling me like he gives me a lot of chances to play, but he helps me calibrate it because, and we'll do a couple of them. We'll do like we just sort of turn the dial. Like we'll do one where I'm like, okay, if I'm not worried about covering it up too much, we'll do a take like that, and then we'll do a take where he's like, great, all of that, and put a total lid on it. And then there's one, and then you kind of ooch and scooch it, and so I think I have a better understanding of. I think it's also circumstantial. So it's like there's some scenes, depending on who I'm talking to, I've got to put more of a lid on it. And obviously with Stuart, um, there's room for air to escape. And there's a scene in it is like also where are we? Are we in actually in the office? Are we on the field? And I think those things and how inappropriate is Stuart being about when he's bringing up conversations. Like I think in season 2, he's always coming to find her. She's like, I'm in the middle of a sting, bro. Like, it's like, it's just like, can we not do this right now? I think that affects what she's willing to show. And I think there's certain emotions she's more willing to show, obviously. And I think that, I think sort of feeling fed up with somebody is probably easier to show than feeling hurt, or being worried. Like those vulnerable feelings are probably ones that she's had to learn to really, in order to, I think, assure other people that she's got it, she has to keep an even keel.
And the Stuart situation creates such an interesting space to get to see throughout the season because, like you said, he keeps trying to bring up their breakup and their relationship in all of the most inopportune moments. And as someone who's very used to being able to handle situations and to keep everything very calm, we do get to see her kind of being thrown off her balance. And what does it look like to have her off kilter? Even when he first wakes up at the hospital and he starts revealing his pet name for her, and she's like, absolutely not. Or the fact that Kate has found out and is trying to talk to her about it, and she immediately refers to her as ma'am, which she never does, and kind of goes
Yeah.
overly formal. And so, what was the space that you found throughout the season in each of these little moments that try to unsettle her and unbalance her, and it actually works?
I mean, I think literally the fact that Stuart wants to talk about the relationship is destabilizing because in my imagination, like you asked me a question about backstory, I feel like Idra is someone that like just ate men alive, and she doesn't really have like it's fun, but she's so career focused, and I think that she's never really. It's not a matter of like I don't want a relationship. I think she literally has been like I don't have time for that. I mean, I think she's having her fun and throwing them to the side and going off and not really thinking about it. So I think the fact that I mean, she doesn't want anyone knowing that kind of information about her. So it is creeping in at all times. And all the reasons she was hesitant to go public in the first season are kind of coming to fruition in the second season. And I think what's so juicy about Deb's writing and the situation she's put Idris Stewart in is that it's like that he is well intentioned, right? Like it's hard to Stewart, he's such a good guy. And but there's something misguided about how he's putting those intentions forward, and that's what Idra is responding to. And I think there is also the classic thing of if the roles were reversed, a woman would never go in, if you saw a woman going into a man's office and interrupting him while he's at work, like it just, I think it's that sort of double standard that she's probably used to on some level that feels so insane to her, like, and she's a very high, like her job, I think in her mind, her job is more important than Stewart's. There's more security clearance. And so I think it points to his fundamental, what she feels lack of respect for her position. So I think that's where she's coming from. So I think it's pretty, and it's also easy when you have a work situation that's out of control to fixate the energy that you can't control and work into your personal dynamic. So in that way, their relationship is like anyone else's, where work stress translates, you put it on your partner. And they're not partnered, but he's probably the person that in recent time is the closest to her. Yeah. And she feels safe enough to be like, to tell him to, fuck off.
There's also so much brilliance in the writing of and the performance in the scene where she has to say to him, look, the reason I can't talk to you about this right now is because I'm going to break down in tears and I can't cry in front of my staff. And that's why we can't have this conversation in the middle of the workplace. And, I think that goes back to what you were talking about at the beginning in terms of just the emotional balance. And so, what was that like in having a scene like that where you really can kind of teeter the line and like bring it a little bit further into the emotion? But again, there still has to be a limit and a cap to that moment.
Yeah, it is really hard. Like that, I think that question of calibration, that's the one I'm constantly thinking about in the show, especially because of her job to be so, she's so dry and what she's saying is so vulnerable, but they're literally in the office hallway. And I think what I have to do a lot for Idra is I have to churn up all the stuff, like as though she were someone that was really expressive, and then I really do have to pray that all the stuff that I'm feeling inside is somehow coming out in my face without moving it. Like it's a tricky thing. And I think that with that scene too, I also, what's funny is that our height difference is so extreme. So there, that thing of like whispering in someone's ear is harder because he's so tall. But it does create a situation where actually in that moment, what was cool was I think she says like come here, and he literally has to bend down, and I just remember in that moment like I got to stand up real tall and I got to make him come to me. And so there's something powerful in that, but it's a weird thing to say something so vulnerably but have to present, and it's in the writing. She says my placid face. So what's great is as an actor, that writing forces you to have a container. Like it sets the limits already. And you have to be economical and really like I just pray that people, I'm like, I hope people see her heart. Like I don't, like because she looks so boss and stern. And yeah, you gotta like churn it all up underneath. And I do think, I think Idra drinks a lot. I think she's like definitely like a flask kind of girl. And like I don't know if there are details that you can see on screen, but like the set design and the production designers are so amazing. They always have these like um wrappers of like candy bars and like snacks on her desk. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly right. Like I think she just eats trash because she sleeps in her office. Like I think she's very much like a packaged food kind of girl.
I love the level of detail in this show, and and also in talking about her dynamic with Kate, it's been really beautiful to watch that friendship blossom to a place where they both really lean on each other. But then in this season as well for Idra, you have that added element of say, Kate saying, we're bringing Hal into this
Yeah,
play. And that's someone that Idra doesn't trust. And Kate even
yeah.
points out, you don't trust him because I've told you not to, but now I'm telling you that we need him. And so how did that really create a slightly different dynamic for it all, especially because in terms of them protecting Margaret Roylin and keeping her in the safe house, Idra knows that her entire job and career that she's worked her entire life for is on the line in these choices they're making.
Yeah, it is tricky. I mean, one of the things that Deb and I have talked about, and I talked about with the sort of our consultants, is that when you're making decisions with imperfect information all the time, and that's sort of what's so hard about what you're doing is you don't, and you never know how much you can trust a source. And I think with Kate, she's having to hedge her bets because I think she does think Kate is super smart, capable. She wasn't sure about her first season, but she revealed that she actually knew what was going on quicker than anyone else did. So she wants to put her eggs in that basket, but it means dealing with this other person that she doesn't trust. And I think in some ways, Idra's been in that position before, right? Like, and Hal is sort of the collateral that she doesn't want to deal with. But and it is true that at every turn he is a chaos monster. Like there's always something. And I think her hope is that Kate will manage it. You know that like but it is an unpredictable element, and I think she's unhappy about it, and I think she lets Kate know. But it's like I don't think Idra has a lot of choices. I think if she had a better plan than Kate did with Royland, she would pivot to that. But I think Kate's plan is the best plan. So yeah.
Do you find yourself kind of going through the scripts and going through the scenes and really figuring out, what is her play several steps ahead? Because whenever she presents an idea to any of the other characters, it's never just, well, this is the next thing I need to do. It's if we do this, the thing that you're suggesting, then this is all the outcome that's going to happen from it. NATO might fall apart if we do this thing instead of this thing. So here's why we have to go this route. And I love how detailed she is in her processing and the way that she's thought things out. But that must also create a lot of complexity in playing her.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have to understand the plot like backwards and forwards. And which is hard because Ali, as a civilian, is often reading the scripts like constantly going back, and I have to write it all down, and I have to kind of break it down simply like this happens, this happens. And I often will have then a list of questions that I send to Deb. Because I'm like, can you explain this and why? If I care about this, shouldn't I care about that? And I have to track it even if I never have lines about it. And I think that helps me so that when I have scenes where they're coming to me and with a plan and I sort of have, well, wait a minute, I can fully embody it because I've now understood the whole political context that Deb is trying to map out. But yeah, it means like there's no sort of like learning the lines on the day in the makeup chair. It's like I have to have really like I have a little notebook with like, okay, in this scene, this is what like I have to really map it out because so much of Idra is like she's just so direct and clear. So I think if I'm unclear as an actor, I'll be dead in the water.
I also love the whole sequence with all the Margaret Royland decoys
Oh, I
this
know.
season. I
Yeah.
just wanted to ask about getting to film that because that really is everybody on the cast is there. There's so many moving parts to it, and Idra is really kind of the eyes and the ears and the heads of that operation and just executing it. And again, we always see that calmness of, I know this is going to work and we've planned it out and everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, getting to shoot in St. Paul, the whole thing was surreal. It was like we're shooting in this incredible location. And we're the only ones there. It's, vaulted ceilings and there's tiny little me. And in some ways I'm glad I didn't really see through the monitors how grand it was because I think I would have gotten intimidated about how epic it all looked. I really didn't know what it looked like on camera. I just knew what it felt to sit in the pews and watch this all happen. And it just the choreography of it all, and it was certainly a day on set where I just kind of thought, wow, I can't believe this is my job, and it's a real actual move, this whole decoy thing, and it was really fun in the makeup trailer to see like all the wigs. Like they had so many like different wigs, and they had to pull so many and dye so many different ones, and there were some wigs that were better than others, and that was really fun.
There's also so many great details in terms of the writing of, you have all of these rooms of the most intelligent people problem solving some of the biggest problems behind the scenes, but they all have their own approaches and ways in doing it. And even just the detail that Stuart called out in front of Kate of Idra always wants to be the last one in the room because she thinks that then you'll take her advice instead of anybody else's. And so what are some of those intricacies that you found along the way that are very specific to the way that Idra operates and the way that she also manages people? Because like you said, it's such a job in terms of relationships with other people.
Yeah, God, you notice, you're so attentive. That yeah, I love that detail. I mean, I do think that Idra, I think she's just really good at sussing people out. And I think part of, in order to do that, you have to give space to people. And I think that even though she's so powerful in terms of her role and she's clearly like smart and thinking about a million things at once. And also like the truth is that what she's going through with Kate, and that's like one thing in her day, right? Like she's actually got like 10 other missions she's overseeing and other that involve other countries. Like this is just one aspect of her day that we're seeing on screen. So that's something I have to remember too, is that like anytime she's in her office and Kate comes in, like she's doing something else that has nothing to do with that situation. But I do think a lot of it is, I mean, I have certainly learned to try to incorporate like, what does that mean to like not give away so much? Because if you as a person hold back, other people will lean forward. And so I think that's a big part of Idra's thing is like there's patience. Like I think she can lie in wait for a long time. And letting people come to you and um yeah, and just being, I think she's just really measured, which is not something that I personally am. Yeah, she's just measured, and I also think one of the things that I've thought about too is tempo. I mean, obviously, I talk quickly, and it's not that Idra talks slowly, but I think there's something about negotiation of time. And I think when in terms of you control the pace, you control the flow of information. And I think that that is something that in terms of Idra buying time to respond, I think that's something that she also does as well.
That's great. And in jumping over and talking about Agatha all along, I love the fact that in playing Alice throughout those episodes, that when we first meet her at the beginning, before she, Agatha shows up and takes her down the road, that she's really disconnected from this huge part of herself. She is a blood witch and she's a descendant and a protection witch, but she's really tried to separate herself from that side because it's caused so much pain and so much trauma over the years. And then we gradually get to see her really, really reconnecting and kind of allowing that to become a part of herself again. And so, as you were going through the episodes, I just wanted to ask about the way in which you carried that journey of reconnecting with a part of herself that had been so painful to open up before.
Yeah, I mean, in the script, they talked a lot in the first few episodes about like her shoulders being really like hunched up and she has these scars on her, literal scars on her shoulders. And so I thought about like what it was to actually feel like you're carrying the weight of the world, and that as she reconnects to this core part of her, that like her it's so cheesy, but like that her heart can actually open, and that like this part of her can feel lifted. So that was something I thought about a lot. Was just physicality, and also the first two episodes she's wearing this jacket, and it kind of envelops her, and I did a lot of pocket acting, like it just like like I just thought about her like in a cocoon, like everything is kind of armor, like her hair is armor, like it's all just a defensive mechanism to sort of shield her and posture like she's tough when actually like I think she's like the touchy-feeliest of them all. Like I think she's actually the softest of them all. And the most sensitive. And so, but she's presenting like, don't fuck with me. Um, and yeah, so I think I also thought a lot of like, I don't think she smiles at all until like the after her trial. Um, I think she just feels really heavy. Like I think it's like literally depressive energy, and then something gets liberated. And I just imagined her feeling like lighter and yeah, just and I also thought about like feeling like, she's almost like returning to like a kid-like place once the curse is lifted, like because she can return to that innocent place before all this trauma happened. And yeah, so that was something I thought about, like when someone is feeling more like childlike, what happens to them, and just physically, like the way children are with their bodies, like that was just stuff I was thinking about. I mean, I don't know if it came across on screen, but
No, I think it did. I can see all of those things that you're talking about. And you're bringing up the trial and the lifting of the curse, and it was done through the performance of the ballad and through music. What felt important to you to capture in terms of that? Because it's such an emotionally loaded moment for her, and you're channeling it all into the music in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a gift in that way. Like I think because literally I was scared to have to sing and play. I think that's some demons I personally had to face, of like, oh, I don't know if I'm that good of a singer. And not that it matters, but I used those things to kind of connect to her resistance to performing it. And basically I kind of had to map it out like choreography, in terms of like, where did I think in the music she starts to connect. And one of the things I talked about with the Bobby and Kristen, who composed the song, and Jack, was like, there's this bridge that happens where we all sort of vocally harmonize. And originally there was another verse after that we performed, that Agatha sings. And one of the things that I was talking about with them was like, once the bridge happens, and they had put me on the top line in the harmony, which is like the soprano line with freaking Patti LuPone. And I was like, I was just saying, like, I think once we hit the bridge, and actually it physically, I literally have to really sing because of the vocal line. And I was like, I think it's going to be really hard to justify for myself why after that I would stop singing. I was like, I think once we hit the bridge, like, I think Alice can't reel it back, because like then she has to go. And so yeah, so then we cut the next verse and we went straight to the end, because and that was for me very helpful as an actor, because I didn't have to figure out like, why do I, once I really start singing, go back, and it could just be a through line. And and I think I worked a lot with our vocal coach, and just sort of like, letting go of the fear of like, yeah, singing publicly. Like, I'm not a singer, yeah, it was just so exciting to get to do that. And I did have to just, that it was easy to channel the emotions of it, just because the lyrics are so clear. And I think also musically it swells in this way that it's just so satisfying. And some of it is honestly just like surrendering and being like, what's going to come out of my voice is what's going to come out. And it doesn't have to be pretty, because she's not technically a singer, so whatever,
It's such a great song. There's also the aspect of, for Alice, and I think for all of them in different ways, they're all in these places of being used to not relying on anyone and not letting anybody else in, and being very self-sufficient, and this journey down the road is very much about letting other people in, and to the point for Alice where she literally uses her powers to protect Agatha, and that ends up being the thing that kills her at the end of the day. And so how did you really calibrate how you felt like she was going to gradually let people in, knowing that ultimately it needed to get to a place of, I'm willing to self-sacrifice for this other person and do something to save them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that thing where I think that impulse in her was always there. She's just burying it. And so there's little things like, um, with Mrs. Hart in the beginning, and she is a protection witch. So I think it's almost like a Pavlovian, like she can't help but try to help people. And so, but she covers it up with this kind of bravado of like, like, what are you doing? But her impulse is always like, let me help. And her immediate connection to teen, and sort of, I think, identifying with being sort of a kid on your own. And so I think that for the moment that she protects Agatha, as a calm, it's like she's finally tapped into her physical power as a witch. So it's just all coalescing in that moment. But I think that she feels so supported, like after the trial, and they're around the campfire kind of sharing and communing. Like that's actually also the first scene where they're all laughing with each other, like the other trials, I think there's just a relief of getting through it. There's also, they're grappling with the death of Mrs. Hart. But I think after the fire trial, Alice's trial, there is a genuine bond that they all share. And I think that really carries her into the self-sacrifice that you see.
And there's so much in terms of the physical mannerisms in that scene between you and Catherine when she's projecting her powers, and then Agatha reaches that point where she can't control it, she can't control absorbing it. And so, how did you set about just figuring out what is that arc and what is that physically going to look like in terms of my performance?
I mean, some of it is just responding to Catherine and us sort of vibing and figuring out what that was. And I think the gift of when you're working with great actors is like there is a sort of intuitive musicality. Like you both understand the story. Like everyone is on telling the same story. I think that's when you're lucky. Like if everyone understands the storytelling and you understand that we have to first see a certain kind of transfer of energy and then that has to shift. Like we're both just reading each other when that happens. And then of course you rely on the director to be like, you can go a little longer, or this can be doesn't need to be as long. And yeah, that day was yeah, I mean, it's also like we don't have the effects and things like that. So you're really just like grunting in absentia with your hands and just really hoping you're selling it, you know?
Well, I really, really love your performances in both of these projects, and I love the range that they show that you always bring to parts. So thank you so much, Ali. Really
Thank you
appreciate it.
so much, Mara. So lovely to talk to you.